17 and I was 18. I'm a very short girl, only about 4'10", and I get anxious when someone even looks at me in a way that suggests they might not like me. So needless to say, I'm incredibly non-confrontational. My friend and I were out shopping. It was something we'd do maybe every few months just to bond since we didn't have much time to hang out due to college. And she's just like me, barely scraping 5'1" and very non-confrontational. It's probably why we became friends. On every shopping trip we would find ourselves in Ann Summers. We're both overly endowed and struggled to find bras anywhere, and Ann Summers always had great sales, so we grabbed the cheap bras while we could. This shopping trip wasn't any different. We browsed shops until we got to Ann Summers, but that's when things took a bit of a turn. I barely stepped foot into the shop when a woman with some sort of Slavic accent stopped me, and her finger jammed into my chest. "Spit the gum out," she demanded. Assuming that she was an employee, I gave a very sheepish, "I'm really sorry," and ran out of the shop to spit the gum out and throw it away. When I went back in, I realized that this woman was not an employee. She was a customer who was browsing and happened to be near the door when my friend and I entered the shop. It should have been obvious to me at the time. No salesperson would ever behave like that, not one that wanted to keep their job anyways. But I kept my head down when I walked past her, holding my breath in hopes that she wouldn't notice me again, and she didn't, and I thought I was in the clear. My friend and I browsed the shop, trying to avoid the woman, but the shop wasn't very big, probably only 15 feet by 18 feet, so eventually I ended up at the sales stand by the door where she had been stood. I tried to keep my distance while browsing. I was looking at the price tags but realized that I didn't know what the discount was, so I leaned over slightly to check the discount sign. It's important that I note that this woman had a pushchair, which is a stroller for the Americans, and you'd think that she'd maybe had a child in this pushchair. But no, it was full of plastic carrier bags. I didn't look too much at it, but I could tell that everything in there was double-bagged and tied shut. Whatever was in those bags, she wanted to protect. This sense of protection became very relevant because when I leaned over to look at the discount sign, I was leaning slightly closer to her pushchair. I was still about 3 feet away from it, but apparently it was too close. The woman was on the other side of the chair, but the moment she saw me, she ran around to it where I was stood. She hits me in the face. It was somewhere between a slap and a punch, and I couldn't quite tell because I was in shock. All I knew is that it hurt. "Watch the personal space," she hissed in my ear, and I apologized to her. This woman just hit me and I apologized to her. I regret it now, but at the time I didn't want to provoke her any further, not that I knew what I did to provoke her in the first place. And in my shock, I turned around and ran to the back area, grabbing my friend's hand and pulling her with me. The back area was separated by a tiny wall that only stretched halfway across the shop since they stored the adult toys there and wanted to keep them out of sight of the general public. I stood there holding my friend's hand and shaking as I whispered, "She just hit me," to my friend, and we stood there for a good minute in silence, and my friend was positioned in a way that she could see the rest of the store while I hid behind the wall. "She's gone," my friend told me, and I let out a breath that I didn't even know that I was holding. "Can we stay here for a while?" I asked my friend, worried that the woman would be outside waiting for me. The front of the store was open, but she could have easily just been a couple of feet down the road and out of sight, waiting for me to leave. My friend agreed, and we slowly browsed the shop again. About 5 minutes later, we got to the counter to check out, and the girl working the counter looked outside and then back at us. That woman's been in here for 30 minutes. I didn't know what to do." She told the two of us. "What did she say to you?" She told me to spit out my gum when we first came in, and then she hit me because I was too close to her." "She hit you?" The worker was wide-eyed. "If I'd have known that, I would have called security. I'm so sorry." I smiled and shrugged. "It's fine." It wasn't really fine, but it wasn't the worker's fault. She didn't look much older than I did, and I wouldn't have known what to do in that situation either. And still shaken up, my friend and I made our way out of the store. I looked around but didn't see the woman. "Can we just go home now?" I asked my friend. We hadn't finished browsing all the shops, but I was so paranoid that we bump into that insane woman again. She agreed and we got the bus home. And when I got home, my parents encouraged me to report the incident to the police, and I called the non-emergency line, and their answer was basically, "Well, what do you expect us to do about it?" And unless I went back to the Ann Summers and requested the security footage, which I wasn't sure if they actually had, they wouldn't do anything. It's been just over 3 years, and now I'm sure that that woman was likely to have been homeless and/or on drugs. It's the only explanation I can think of for the carrier bags and her protectiveness. It was either everything she owned, or drugs, or maybe even both.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Patricia, that's such an old name. Poor you. Who named you this? It was a lady I just met a few minutes ago in Walmart's grocery department when I was shopping. I had picked up the last 2 remaining cabbages that were on sale, and when she asked me to give her one, even though I didn't want to hand her over the cabbage, I still let her have it. I was about to leave when she asked me about my name. And the rest of her criticized it. Without replying or saying a word, I just left there to continue my shopping. It wasn't my first time shopping alone at Walmart, but still, it was after a long period of time since I had come shopping. Mostly, I would ask my husband to bring the items we need, or whenever my mother-in-law went shopping, she would buy the stuff we needed at home. So I never had a chance to come out and buy anything myself. It had been 6 months or so since I got married, and yes, my in-laws live in the same house as us, which is pretty nice, because being an orphan, living in a family with many members had always been my dream. And after getting married to Josh, it finally came true. They all adore and spoil me because they never had a daughter in their family, which they always wished for. Josh was at work today, and my mother-in-law was visiting one of her friends. So I thought I should go out there for once and buy the groceries myself. I took out my phone and checked the list, and that's when I saw the same woman coming in my direction. I don't know why, but I wasn't getting a good vibe from her, so I turned in a different direction to avoid her. After that, I did not see her and continued to focus my shopping for the rest of my time there. As I was picking up the last item on the list, I heard a commotion coming from the electronics department. So I thought I'd go in there and check out what was going on. When I reached there, I saw a crowd circling 2 people. From what I could tell, that one of them was the woman from earlier. He was pulling out a white girl's hair and shouting at her. While the employees were trying to pull them apart from each other, the 2 of them were continuously cussing each other and calling out names. I could not understand what in the world was going on here, except that the 2 women were going on at each other, fighting nasty. "Hey, what's going on here?" asked a girl in the crowd who was also watching them like me. "I don't know, I also got here a few minutes ago," he replied to me. The fat woman you see over there pulling at the girl's hair, she was pickpocketing, and when the girl saw that, she started blaming her and arguing with her. Another lady from the crowd said, "Let's call her A." No, I heard it was the girl who was pickpocketing the lady, and she was just trying to stop her when she started attacking her. Another lady in the crowds heard our conversation and added, "Let's call her B." You heard? I was there when it happened. The girl called out the woman for pickpocketing, and they started arguing over her. Lady A said, which made Lady B silent. Everyone present there was also filming the fight or discussing which one of them was there to blame. After 15 minutes of watching the fight, I thought it would be useless and decided to proceed with my shopping. I went to the counter and stood there in line. Not to my surprise, there were fewer people there because of the fight. So my turn came up quickly and the cashier started to bill up my products. That was when I saw 2 security people dragging the woman with them while the girl was talking with them. Ladies A and B also came and stood in line while talking to each other. They were saying that they could not believe a woman of such an age was pickpocketing and so many things like that. What I could make of the conversation was that the security checked and found her hiding many things. The security had been taking them for a thorough check so that they can find out how many things she had picked. After my billing was done, I paid the money and headed outside the Walmart. As I was taking out the car from the driveway, I could hear everyone present there talking about the lady and the girl who got into a fight. Even though pickpocketing was common, such a commotion in public places such as Walmart were rare at those times. As I was driving back home, I got stuck in traffic for longer than usual because of an accident. A truck driver who was drunk in the middle of the day hit a cab. The cab driver died on spot and the passengers in the cab were badly injured. I could not believe my luck. The first time coming out in a while, and these incidences kept happening in a row. When I reached home, my mother-in-law was already there. She asked me if she was okay because she'd already heard from someone about the fight in the Walmart and the accident that had happened as well. I told her that I was fine, and even though it wasn't such a big deal, it still got me a bit spooked because everything that happened today. Josh came a bit later than usual that night, and when I asked, he told me that one of his colleagues got married recently. His wife got into a fight at Walmart with some lady, so he had to take care of his share of work as well. He told me that his colleague's wife told him that she was shopping on her own, and that lady approached her when she was picking up some items from the sale. After that, she started following her, and that was when she noticed her pickpocketing and slipping some items in the girl's bag. So she called her out for that. I felt a bit relieved that I got away from the lady when I did that, because you never know, it could have been me instead of that girl. And there were chances that she may have blamed me.
This was a few years ago, just after I'd left college. I'd been working at Walmart for a while before moving to the customer service counter. My first holiday season was almost my last. After experiencing the post-Christmas returns period, I threatened to quit if my boss didn't move me out. Thankfully, she relented and I was given my own department. That's where I would stay until the next year's returns rush. I was doing my regular thing in electronics when my boss came to me for a favor. One of the girls scheduled to work customer service had just quit on the spot. She couldn't spare anyone else, and she knew I'd worked there before. I told her no before she could even finish, but she continued to beg. As one last desperate move, she offered to give me New Year's Eve and day off. It was an offer too good to refuse, and I reluctantly agreed. In spite of the desk being backed up to the doors, my fellow coworker and I were blowing through the line fast. People seemed to be a bit nicer than they had the previous year. That was until I began assisting this unkempt-looking man. He had a car seat for a toddler that he wanted to return. The guy seemed a little out of it. I had asked him twice about the receipt before he pulled this crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to me. I unfolded it and began the refund process. As I took the seat from the counter and sat it in a nearby basket, I made a passing comment to a coworker about the guy returning it because he needed to get high. It was just something that I expected from the area, something to that effect. I know it was in bad taste, but my coworker laughed and I returned to the counter to give the guy his money. He was staring a hole through me and gritting his teeth. He said, "I heard that. I'd watch your back if I were you." I could tell he meant business. I didn't want to draw attention, so I apologized under my breath and quickly handed him his money. Before he was able to say anything else, I called for the next customer. He reluctantly stepped away but remained close by, continuing to give me a death stare for several minutes. There was something about the look that terrified me. Although I kept working, a feeling of nausea boiled in my guts until he finally left. The next 3 hours dragged by, and because of the incident, my mood had taken a drastic downturn. I was overjoyed to see it end, but terrified of what may await me outside. There was no way I was going to my car alone. I went to seek out a coworker that I'd been dating on and off for a while. He agreed to walk me out to my car, and we stopped just inside the doors to look out. I didn't see the guy, so we continued on. The two of us stopped again briefly, but there was still no sign of him anywhere. Customers were coming and going, driving by us. Nothing looked off, and we headed across the lot to my car. I was relieved and beginning to think that I had just been overreacting. I knew it was a stupid thing to say, but I didn't know what the outcome would be. Then a car came out of nowhere and began racing up from behind us. The headlights were blinding, and I just began to panic and I froze. And if it wasn't for my companion, I may have been run down. He pushed me between two cars, following close behind. As the car sped by, the driver hurled a disgusting name at me and disappeared onto the access road. I thanked my hero and slowly got back to my feet. He insisted that we call the cops, but I refused. As stupid as it may sound, I was afraid involving them could cost me my job. But allow me to explain. I've been chewed out for being rude to customers before. I would have to explain why the man was so angry to me. If my boss heard what I'd said, I'd definitely lose my promised 2 days off and probably be fired. Rightfully so, I guess. Of course, I could lie and play dumb, but that never works out in the end. I decided to wager on the chance that he was done with me and would move on. And that turned out to be the case, fortunately. Various coworkers continued to walk me to my car after that shift. 2 months passed before I figured I was safe and returned to going solo. To this day, I've not seen that man again and hope never to. Whether I just got lucky or he never intended to kill me, I'll likely never know. Either way, I'm just happy to be alive. My attitude towards strangers changed after that incident, and for the remainder of my time working directly with customers, I made a concerted effort to treat them with respect. I suggest you take this story to heart. We may all have our little episodes of disrespect when dealing with our fellow person. Nobody's perfect. I'm definitely not. But keep in mind, however, you never really know what a stranger is capable of. One arrogant little slip could cost you your life.
I've worked as a mall Santa for the past few Christmases now. I'm only 33, but thanks to my complete lack of exercise routine, I definitely have the figure for it. And once I have the beard and the wig and hat combo going, there's basically no telling the difference between me and a 60-year-old dude. Mall Santa work can be tough for a few different reasons. Number one, the hours are really long, and the pay can be really terrible depending on which model you manage to get employed by. Number two, the kids can be little monsters, and their parents can be just as terrible on occasion too. But the reason I'm actually considering skipping the entire thing this year and having something of a budget Christmas is that you get some seriously disturbing things happening from time to time. I mean, the kinds of things that keep you up at night, even after a long, exhausting shift. However, the worst thing that's ever happened to me as a mall Santa was actually nothing to do with kids. Parents are terrible, paying hours, and I'm sure you'll see why after I tell you the story. So every year, usually when the mall is required is during weekday mornings, we get specially organized visits from special needs kids or adults with learning disabilities who were bussed in from the surrounding areas. Pretty much every other mall Santa I've spoken to about this agrees that it can be one of the most rewarding parts of the job, and that the adults with learning difficulties are often even more excited about the prospect of meeting Santa. And some of the kids are literally the only downside is that some of them are so heavy that my thighs hurt after having like 50 in a row sit on my lap. But other than that, it's honestly one of the best parts of the job. Last year, I'm in the middle of one of the special sessions when I get this girl coming up and sitting on my lap. I say girl, but she was legitimately a grown woman looking like she was in her mid-30s or something. But she had a mental age of about 9 or 10. All smiles and giggles, way shy about meeting Santa again. It was cute as all get out. But the interaction was not so cute, and turned that way pretty fast. So, like I said, she's all giggles and smiles as she comes up to sit on my lap, and I give her the usual spiel asking her name, how old she is, if she's excited for Christmas, and all that stuff. Then when it comes to asking her what she wants me to bring her on Christmas Eve, she starts thinking about it, and smiling at first, before she suddenly gets super serious with a touch of sadness. I'm asking her if she's okay, what the problem is, and she's like shaking her head, acting like she doesn't want to tell me anything. I take the time and explaining that no matter what she asks for, I'll try my very, very best to bring it to her. no matter how big or small it is, that Santa always tries his best to bring good little girls and boys what they ask for on Christmas. She takes a moment. Then the exchange goes a little something like this. You mean it, Santa? He can get me anything I want for Christmas. Anything. Anything you want. Just tell me and I'll do my best. Okay. Well, at this point, she lowers her voice to a whisper and leans into my ear. I want my boyfriend to stop hitting me. Can you make that happen? Was sort of dumbstruck for a second. Like all of the things I thought she was going to ask, that would most definitely not have topped the list. I remember just nodding at first, trying to find the words and being like, go make that happen for you. Sure, no problem. She was so happy to hear that I'd fix it for her and gave me the biggest hug I think I'd ever received while working as a mall Santa. I had to put on a huge smile. And of all the times I've had to fake being jolly and merry, that time with her was the hardest. But I just felt numb, like completely broken by what I'd heard. And I just tried my best to get through the rest of the session without bursting into tears. I remember all these thoughts rushing through my head, terrifying ideas of institutional abuse. She said boyfriend, and that made it extra creepy. Like, sure, it could have been just another guy in her care group or something. Another adult with learning difficulties who she'd hooked up with somehow. But there was nothing to say that it wasn't a member of her care team that was like abusing her in a completely different sense. To not just physically, but, well, catch my drift. So when the session was over, I approached the member of the care team that had organized the trip and accompanied them to the mall. I didn't let anything slip. I just told them how great I thought the session had gone, and that's have a few details about the group that had organized them. As it turned out, they were all from the same care home type thing. So I made a note of the name of the place as well as the name of the girl that it was apparently being abused. That night I couldn't sleep. I just kept picturing some evil monster abusing that poor girl, taking advantage of their position to put some poor special needs woman through torture, then telling her that she'd be killed if she ever breathed a word of it to anyone. And here's where stuff starts getting even more intense. Now, I could have just called 911. With the info I had at hand, registered a general complaint and then heard nothing back about it. A buddy of mine, had a cousin with the local police department, and not just some gumshoe B-cop either. They were a detective. It took some convincing, but I convinced my buddy to pass along their cell phone number so I could get in touch with the dude personally. It took a while, but I managed to get through to the guy who sounded pretty skeptical at first and seemed kind of irritated that his cousin had given me this number. But once I explained what the issue was, his tone changed completely. Now, I didn't find this out until way later from my friend, but his cousin had a special needs daughter who was probably going to have to either live with them for the rest of their life or was going to head into a group home at some point so she could have some measure of independence. So when I explained the situation with the special needs girl I met as a mall Santa, it obviously hit the guy right in the feels as the topic was so close to home. The detective tells me that he'll look into it. Thanks for letting him know. I get him to promise to tell me if anything comes up, and he says yes, and we hang up. And that was the last I heard of it for like a month. Then, maybe 5 or 6 weeks, I'd almost forgotten about the whole thing. Christmas was over the mall. Santa's job was way behind me, and I was back to working my regular hours as a self-employed mechanic. Then I get a call from a number that seems vaguely familiar, although I wasn't quite sure why. Turns out, it was my buddy's detective cousin, who reminded me of the tip that I'd given him about the care company. Of course I remembered, but by that time, I really didn't think anything would come of it. But oh, how wrong I was. The detective thanks me for the information, and although he told me he couldn't say too much, he told me to keep an eye out on local media outlets. The next thing I know, it's all over the local papers that there have been a misconduct scandal involving a local care company. I picked up a copy and read the story, only to find out that it's the very same one I had reported. The long and short of it is that the cops had uncovered endemic levels of abuse in the company. Stuff that varied from financial discrepancies to straight up physical abuse. And sickeningly enough, there was even cases of care workers taking advantage of mentally disabled females in ways that were seriously inappropriate. There were numerous arrests, with some of the sleazier and violent criminals looking like they were going to get years in prison for how long they so cruelly taken advantage of some of the most vulnerable people in society. It made me sick to my stomach to read about how some people could bring themselves to do something like that. But it was stopped. And I felt incredible that I'd actually managed to be a part of the chain of events that brought the whole thing crashing down. I just hope that that poor girl, who was obviously pretty traumatized by what was happening to her and just not being able to understand why it was happening, either found some measure of peace after it. And in a way, Santa did kind of bring her exactly what she wanted, even if it wasn't on Christmas Day. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a thought that never fails to make me tear up.